We continue with the Dutch digital media internet artist Constant Dullaart. I'm very happy that you could make it today. Since April last year, he's a professor in Nuremberg as a chair of the field called networked materialities, and in that spirit we are going to look at his work related to the topic we're discussing here. Constant.
Thank you very much, Geert, and thank you for the entire organization. As my friend Áron Moulton, curator, also said this morning, this is the holy ground of conferences around media art and fake news, and it's really an honor to speak here. I'll hopefully also hopefully there's also some fun in my presentation.
Ever feel like the world is just one giant, never-ending crisis? Like we're stuck in this crazy cycle of war and climate chaos and social unrest?
Yeah, I hear that.
Well, good news, you are not alone. It's actually got a name now. PermaCrisis.
PermaCrisis?
It's like this feeling like we're constantly bombarded with these interconnected, overlapping issues, and there's no end in sight.
Oh yeah, I get that.
And guess what? There's a conference happening right now as we speak in Budapest called MetaForum X. And there, artists, thinkers, tech folks, they're all diving deep into this whole perma-crisis idea.
Wow.
I've got their program notes here, speaker bios, some articles about past MetaForums.
You're doing your homework.
Well, you know, we got to do these deep dives, right?
Right.
To help us unpack it all, we've got our expert here ready to break down some of the key ideas. So, you know, the first MetaForum was way back in 1994.
That's a while ago.
Yeah, back when the internet was just starting to take off.
Yeah, the early days.
And even then, artists were trying to wrap their heads around this whole new digital world.
It's fascinating to see how this conference has evolved over the years.
Yeah.
You know, it started back then, just as the internet was starting to take off, like you said.
Yeah.
Artists back then, they were trying to figure out this new digital world.
So I'll check into this podcast later. I generated this morning with access to the two sites, actually, to Trafó and the Institute of Network Cultures. It was generated within 10 minutes, and it's a 20-minute podcast on the conference, and I think they're quite to the point. I use it now for like many things, but we'll check in later. It's a notebook, lm.google, if you want to use it yourself. But like, of course, like all the data on the website already belonged to Google, so I didn't find any problem with like giving Google the links to the website. So just basically track the website. I'll enter this talk also from my personal artwork perspectives. So I find myself doubting if I'm a bot, as you see here. So I'm like, every time I get this notification, I'm somewhat self-conscious about filling that out. So I started to investigate bots in, as said, like 2014. Buying these types of bots, and I was interested in the idiosyncrasies of the bots, like for example how the images were automatically cropped to fit the square format. For example, reminiscence, like if you're really reminiscent of your army, time in the army, you might not crop off the head of your friends. Or I never knew that you could snowboard a marathon. I also think that's a really long downhill slope for a marathon size. And I saw the bios in 2014 for the bots were really interesting because they basically just spun the text. So they altered the text. So this is a mechanical engineer, 29 years old, graduated from ITM. I think the original person that wrote this graduated from MIT. John Allen writes beautifully inspirational, I'll prove to the world that I would come some hidden important to the net someday. So I live by this motto, of course. And Darset says, I love so much Astenieber, which I'm still trying to figure out who she loves. So I was buying these bots and I saw my own bot follower account grow, and I felt like I was wearing new shoes, like sometimes, or like new clothes. Like sometimes you would see yourself in the mirror wearing other clothes and you would think you would redefine yourself as a person. I felt like that when I saw these bots. And then I thought, like, I want to give that pleasure to other people that are important in the cultural field, like, for example, Klaus Biesenbach, a curator. So I decided to give him 100,000 followers because I could just gift these to open accounts. And then I saw this young aspirational artist that didn't have that much followers yet. And I thought, this person, you know, like the strange name, Jeff Koons, but he says he's original, so I think he, you know, should also have 100,000 followers, because I should remove the competition between Biesenbach and Koons. You know, they're battling for these likes, and it's kind of this whole serotonin, kind of dopamine thing, struggle in their brain, like they're afraid to be irrelevant, they're sitting in the bathroom checking the likes. I should help them. I will weigh the same, of course, like doing it from the other side of the magic firewall of China, like having to access a VPN and like garnishing all these likes and relevance. But the funny thing is that I also included Hans-Ulrich August, who was mentioned, who actually was really close to 100,000, but I also gave them to Amalia Ullmann during the performance, which I think was also kind of interesting because I unfollowed the account because I felt so horrible looking at the performance because it was so intense, and I didn't know. But I was recommended to see it happening, like almost like a train wreck, and then I thought, like, I can't follow. But I did see an artist working with these likes, so working with that kind of, let's say, artificial social capital, and seeking kind of relevance through getting artificial social capital. As you see here, these are the numbers that it grew at that time. So that's a significant contribution, I think. But when I got a phone call from the New York Times, I thought finally they got on, like they're now getting, my actual media critique is getting into the New York Times. I was on my way to a funeral and I thought, like, this makes up for the whole funeral. But it didn't, because they didn't get the whole thing that it was about, and they were just like writing about how cool Instagram was. So I thought I should have my own private virtual army. And I would do that on Facebook. So I did that in 2015. And you can do that with phone-verified accounts, and of course that also stands for private virtual armies. I used all the names of the Hessian soldiers. I got them from the University of Marburg and actually had them claimed by people in the Philippines and Bangladesh, and they all got registered on Facebook. So yeah, as you see, I took these pictures. There was Justin Bieber again, but I gave these instructions and this whole weird army came out. They still have their birthday because they all have the same birthday and the same password, and so sometimes, like, friends of mine send me screenshots about the fact that the army, the ones that are left that were actually not deleted by Facebook, still have their birthdays. So, and we had them post, or I had them post, an essay about identity in the time of social media. But the thing was also, when I launched this army, sorry, I'm getting slightly nervous about finishing all this, everything I want to say at this beautiful conference in time. Let me catch my breath. Yeah, the thing was that this was exactly in the time when Bernie was still in the race to win from Hillary. And Trump was already there. And we knew that this is going to be an active thing, because we could imitate an audience, we could imitate relevance with this army. So this was 2015. This was before, let's say, the whole news about Cambridge Analytica came out. So it was kind of interesting that I was like visiting think tanks about like trying to figure out like what this would mean. And I advised Data and Society in New York and how to do it and how easy it was to run from my studio, and how I met people that were running Twitter armies with like 5 million bots from their living room. And the thing was that I set up a commission to decide what we're going to do. Are we going to give them to Trump and then later say it's fake? Or are we going to give them in support of something we actually think is a worthwhile cause and then not say it's fake? So that was like a kind of difficult thing, and I had like a lot of discussions and we could never decide. And in the end, I have this, of course, like a high point in my career that I made something fake and it got to be on the BBC. And I found all the SIM cards that were used actually for the army, and I bought like a lot of these SIM cards that were used to make these fake accounts. So I still have about like 500,000 of these SIM cards if you're ever interested in researching SIM cards that contain access to fake accounts. But because it's a weapon that I never deployed, I was interested later on because I saw the weapon being deployed for politics and for propaganda. So I was interested in like, can I then deploy it? So I started to use these accounts to write poetry and leave them in the comments. And in the end, so you see here, it's a slow scroll through the poem. As one we come here to speak, sentiments repeated, strong and bleak, packets received, copied, sent, love borrowed, bought, and lent. At the EU Council, but I think in the end there was only a social media manager of the EU Council that received all these perfectly timed comments while they were sitting in the bathroom or something, and they were weirded out. Nothing really happened with this, but I did decide to go back into like more traditional heraldic national structures, because you could buy these accounts based on gender and on country or cultural affiliation if that group of people doesn't have their own country. So for example, Germany. So this that was a female account, this is a male account. Turkish account, so that's also funny, I could buy it as a Turkish account, but it's Kurdish apparently. US accounts, of course, Russian accounts, Ukrainian accounts. And that time, of course, like being Dutch, we were like closely involved in, or at least we were very aware after shooting of the airplane of what happened. But when the war actually increased, there was a strange thing that happened, that I had to request my work to be removed from the galleries in Moscow because it was being exhibited there. So then there's this really strange moment where my activism or my kind of simulation of that or my comment on that is then actually physically removed. So I won't play the whole video, but of course it's quite dramatic when they're actually removing the Ukrainian flag from, in that kind of statement from Tretyakov Gallery in Moscow. I did have a response that I was like seeing art and like all these kind of like strange online platforms that I I hated, I didn't like, and I made my own. So for example, this is also referring back to Ljubljana. This is Axioma hosting that exhibition, an exhibition curated by Domenico Quaranta, and people could meet, and we make sure that there's peer-to-peer connections, so there's no surveillance possible. We all run it on our servers, and we control the code. And we're working to release it open source because it's still now a Jenga tower of code, which I'm embarrassed to show to any professional programmer. But it works, so we hosted like this, for example, this exhibition from Shiraz in Iran, and we would have all these kind of like interesting exhibitions talking about like, let's say, the difficulties to host these types of works. This is why I wanted to hurry up a little bit, is spoofing representation. So now, of course, like we get into AI, or at least I would get into AI, and these are like the core ingredients where my work started of like analyzing an image. So you would say, like the first filter of a convolutional neural network of analyzing a picture, having a lot of straight lines, curves, contrasts, colors, and basically these are the ingredients in which you can like make a composition of an image. So you would say like a picture of a horse would have more straight lines than an apple, for example. So if you would compare it like that on a methodical level, you would think like, okay, there's a recipe of lines, colors, and gradients to contrive an apple, and there's another type of recipe of lines, curves, gradients, and colors that would generate a horse. So I made a work in which we would actually remove the objecthood of a representation, so actually dismantle the value of representation. So this is actually a dull fruit bowl, because at that time there was the Google Deep Dream, and it tried to emphasize certain neurons that were that would stimulate the human brain, and I tried to remove that. So this is the analysis that would happen. So I released it on dull, and actually recently restored it, dulldream.xyz, so you can still try it how we did that in 2017. But here you see that it actually looks at the saliency of the image, so where's like the detail of the image, and then it actually, we re-render the interesting parts of the image to make a more boring picture. So everybody that has an interesting picture, they want to see in my 2017 style of more boring version, you can still upload it. So that was that fruit bowl. a more boring fruit bowl. This is a more boring monstera leaf. And then you would see these are a bunch of pictures that people uploaded using the site at that time. So by now, of course, like we have the photorealistic generation, and we can tweak these generations, right? So this, I think this is where we get into like an important realm where we can add these small kind of cultural values, and the resolution of generating this stuff becomes so much more detailed, and it becomes so much more on like that level of objecthood that we're not dealing about like the representation of an apple anymore, but it's actually onto like cultural values. And I think this becomes quite interesting in like comparing these cultural values again, because there's since this whole time there's always like the discussion about a bias, and we know that we can't remove bias from a data set. The only solution that there was, at least in the early times of Google, was that you could look through different country accesses of Google. So you could have an American birthday, so this is google.com, and this is, for example, in Hindi, a birthday in India. So there's a cultural change, of course, of like how you access the data that Google distributes, but it's really hard as a customer, as let's say the end user, to kind of be able to switch these kind of preferences. So it's not that you have access, like you have this golden pathway that you are served to keep you within that theme of relevance. So Google had it, it was quite easy to do that, but it intentionally removed that. So the incentive is there to intentionally keep you within that kind of cultural preference. And I think that's my most important point of today is that there's this incentive to spoof relevance. And the commercial incentive, the capitalist incentive, is to spoof validity. And it's not there, the incentive that is there technically to say like we can validate if an image is real or not. There's too much incentive to spoof that it might be real. Also in 2017 I made my own data set for the VNA, and I tried to collect European values, which was impossible. I talked to all these kind of European art, historical museums, and almost nobody had like these kind of cultural products that would validate like European identity. But in the end, of course, like we had to select them, and then we came to the donor. So of course, like me being active in Germany, you know, the Germans really say that they invented the donor. And of course, we know that every culture has some kind of gluten-fed animal slices kind of food. But this is the donor last year. So you see this kind of like painterly, beautiful, dreamy like version that I generated, and I wanted to celebrate that we were in this naive point in time, because we knew that it was going to be photorealistic. So now we have this, right? So, well, actually we have more. This was a year ago. This was Bleu d'Auvergne. This is a current Bleu d'Auvergne. And this is a very blurry Bleu d'Auvergne, which I really like, that kind of idea that you can maximize certain inputs, so you can maximize it to an extent that it would be too loud. Brandenburger Tor, beautiful kind of like trippy artistic rendition where you would think this kind of, you could confuse it with expressionist kind of, impressionist kind of relationship to photography. Current Brandenburger Tor still filled with like beautiful stone artifacts and confusion. But what I really liked is that there could also be Brandenburger Tor, which is two Brandenburger Tor. So it's like a nationalist identity that actually is too loud. And I like this one even more. It's like 200% Brandenburger Tor. It's like really loud Brandenburger Tor. Croissant, the same, of course, like Europe, you have to have croissants if they don't have it in other countries. Current, like beautiful, you know, like photorealistic croissant. But I really love this croissant. So, if you know a baker, I'm trying to work with bakers in many different countries to make a Moebius strip croissant. I like this one even more, but what I want to show is a thing in the background, namely so even the dish is a croissant. So this confusion of like one style element that is like then projected on something else is of course what Van Gogh was doing. You know, like he was just painting croissant like grass and croissant like clouds. And in the end, there's like human creativity comes very close to this kind of technical idea of latent space, of projecting a value, a style value of one thing onto another thing, and that we will now come into an era where that kind of like human trait of confusing these kind of values won't necessarily be creative anymore. This is my accordion, and I wanted to show it just because I've been dealing with accordions my entire life. I don't play it, I somehow like them. And this is an accordion, like a very loud accordion, an even louder accordion. So I think this is a beautiful sculpture. But I still, of course, like this naive kind of in-between. But this choice now that we have with AI, like this kind of like, I made my own data set in 2017, but it's like getting, of course, like how people use AI now is like a kind of golden pathway to just generate something on Mid-Journey or using OpenAI's DALL-E, or a kind of one-way entry point into how to communicate with that technology. Open source possibilities like Stable Diffusion, also like partially developed as an academic research tool in Munich, which I think is important to consider. There was actually an academic research tool that spawned this at the LMU in Munich. Offers this possibility for communities to kind of work with different models and combine these different models and actually make sure that you can actually also safeguard certain cultural values within a model that you can interact with without becoming dependent on this kind of golden kind of access to AI through these black box capitalist incentives. So Facebook, that's also the weird thing, the thing where I'm now at, that of course I was fighting Facebook, but they just invested 20 billion into their training of Llama models that are released open source. So there's this kind of strange discrepancy towards like being evil and ruining everyone's dopamine infrastructure in their brain, but also, you know, seeing if they could release this kind of technology as open source. But this kind of model switching, I think, is something that's quite dangerous if we lose it in the future. And I think we're at that crossroad that we might lose that because everybody will start to use these kind of dominant pathways. So now I'll come to like some kind of more theoretical, let's say, conclusions that I'm drawing. So if the validity of a signifier, so basically of the image, can be spoofed for money, so as I said, for like what Facebook would do, I would argue that the value of, and I would argue that the value of contemporary art based on the technical verifiable representation of reality, and creating a tension between the signifier and the signified that we can verify, that is changing. We are no longer in this time. We will become aware that we had a few generations in which we believed that photography might be real, and now photographs are just like paintings, or just like wartime paintings depicting a battle. It will be as relevant as that, and there's of course still some beliefs that we would have some kind of technical verifiable method to see if an image was AI manipulated or not. But as my argument is that the intent is there, the intention is there to actually spoof that, to also make that more real. So if you would see a technique that you could verify that it's actually true, so you would see it now, for example, that images, you could find AI images because they treat the JPEG algorithm differently. So an actual JPEG compression of an image, you would see how it's comprised. And now, because the AI is generating the JPEG from the beginning, there's different, it has different artifacts. Which means that people now know, and they can build the AI to make artifacts look like it's a JPEG compression. And that incentive will be there, and that won't go because there's too much money behind it. And there's so much political gain to be had. So what happens if the relationship between signifier and signified is a hijackable transaction? You know, and then of course we get back to these kind of like strange things that we're seeing now, and of course, like I'm showing the cute version, with some kind of awareness and some kind of European incentive to say that the end user might signal that it's fake, but in the end, the incentive is there that the end user won't see that anymore. So, therefore, I would argue we're in this time of iconoclasm. You know, this would suggest that the capitalist and currently loudly propagated privately owned networks network public squares like X, libertarian incentive is there to make it harder to verify the relationship between signifier and signified. And that this technology that we have with open source kind of modulation of like where we get our culture from, and that we can be interested in somebody else's culture that we represent within a model, that will be in the past soon. Because this is the golden pathway. You know, this will be the golden pathway on a machine to interact. And one of my, I liked it that today, one of the suggestions that ChatGPT gave is to plan a mental health day. So I'll end with like a note that I think we should celebrate these times filled with artifacts of imperfection. So this is the meme, of course, like everyone, AI art will make designers obsolete, and then AI accepting the job and then generating way too many fingers or strange arms because it didn't understand that concept from the images. But by now it's updated, so the AI images will have convincing amounts of fingers. But I chose to celebrate it because, so I had actually the prop makers from the Matrix make a photorealistic version or an actual hyper-realistic version of the handshake. Thank you very much.